You ever sit in a room so quiet you could hear your heartbeat? Not from fear, but from stillness. That moment, when the phone's not buzzing, the world's not screaming, and even your own mind takes a breath. That's not emptiness, that's your soul stepping forward. We live in noise, constant noise, but when the body goes silent, the soul finally gets a chance to speak. And what it says might just change your life. A lot of people run from silence. The moment it gets quiet, they reach for their phone, turn on the TV, start scrolling, play music, call someone, anything to avoid that stillness. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that silence equals emptiness. That if things go quiet, it must mean something's wrong. That silence is this scary void we should avoid. But what if that's the lie? What if silence isn't emptiness at all? What if it's clarity? We live in a world that rewards noise. The more you post, the more you say, the louder you are, the more attention you get. And we've gotten so used to the noise, we think it's normal. We think it's necessary. But the truth is, noise isn't always productive. Sometimes it's just distraction dressed up in activity. And when the body finally goes silent, that's when something real can begin. See, silence strips away the distractions. It removes the masks. When everything outside goes still, you start hearing what's going on inside. And for a lot of people, that's terrifying. Because inside there's confusion, regret, doubt, dreams that got buried under business, questions that never got answered because they never got asked. But here's the shift. Those moments of silence, they're not empty, they're mirrors. And mirrors aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to show you what's real. Most people spend their lives reacting. Wake up, go to work, deal with problems, scroll through opinions, go to bed, repeat. They never stop. Never listen. But when you finally get quiet, when you let the world fade out for a moment, something inside you starts to surface. And it's not chaos, it's truth. It's that still, steady voice you've been ignoring because everything else has been louder. And it's been trying to tell you who you are, what you need, where you hurt, where you're strong. But you've got to turn down the volume of the world to hear it. Think about it. When have you felt your clearest, your most grounded, your most honest? It wasn't in a crowd. It wasn't in the middle of chaos. It was probably in the middle of a quiet moment. Maybe driving with no music on. Maybe sitting outside just watching the sky. Maybe in that few seconds before sleep, when your mind finally stops racing. That's not a coincidence. That's clarity trying to reach you. And the more you lean into those moments, the more direction you'll find. We've been fooled into thinking busy equals valuable. That if we're not doing, we're wasting time. But some of the most powerful work you can do is internal. And internal work requires quiet. It requires space. It requires you to be still long enough for the truth to show up. That kind of clarity isn't loud. It doesn't force itself in. It waits for permission, and silence is the door you have to open. So the next time it gets quiet, don't run from it. Sit with it. Let it breathe. Let it talk. Because there's a version of you beneath the noise that's wiser, calmer, more grounded. And they're just waiting for a chance to be heard. And when you finally hear them, that's when everything starts to change. Your soul has been speaking to you for years. It's just that most of the time, you've been too loud to hear it. And I'm not talking about volume in the traditional sense. I'm talking about noise disguised as productivity, as survival, as keeping up. We fill our days with to-do lists, notifications, appointments, errands, conversations, scrolling, checking, reacting, constant motion, constant input, and we wear it like a badge of honor. But here's the truth. Just because you're moving doesn't mean you're hearing. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're connected. See, the soul doesn't yell. It's not going to compete with your calendar or shout over your Spotify playlist. It's gentle. It whispers. It waits. It shows up in those in-between moments when you're brushing your teeth and suddenly feel the weight of a choice you've been avoiding. Or when you're alone in your car and, for no reason at all, your chest gets tight and your eyes water. That's not random. That's the soul breaking through the cracks in your noise. And here's where it gets real. The longer you ignore that voice, the quieter it gets. Not because it stops caring, but because you've trained yourself not to listen. You've conditioned yourself to reach for distraction the second you feel discomfort. But discomfort isn't your enemy. In fact, it's one of the soul's loudest whispers. That ache in your gut when you walk into a job that doesn't feel like you anymore. That tension in your chest when you pretend you're okay just to avoid conflict. That restlessness you feel at night, even though your day was packed. That's not weakness. That's your inner truth trying to get your attention, but you won't hear it when your head's full of noise. And that's the trap. We say we're too busy to reflect, too overwhelmed to slow down. But deep down, we're often just afraid of what we'll hear if things get quiet. Because the soul doesn't lie. It won't sugarcoat it for you. It won't play along with your excuses. It'll tell you what you've been avoiding. And sometimes that truth, it's uncomfortable. It forces change. It forces accountability. It asks you to grow. But that's also where your peace lies. That's where the healing begins. You don't need more opinions. You don't need another podcast, another self-help book, another influencer telling you how to live. You need to hear you. That voice that knows when you're out of alignment. That knows what brings you peace. That remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. So what do? You make space. You build silence into your life on purpose. Not just when things fall apart, but regularly, daily. Because when you choose quiet, you give that voice permission to speak. And when it does, don't rush past it. Don't question its value. Listen, even if what it's saying makes you uncomfortable. Especially then, that discomfort, it's trying to lead you back to who you really are. We talk a lot about finding purpose, finding peace, finding ourselves. But the truth is, we're not lost, we're just loud. And if you want to find your way again, you don't have to do more. You just have to listen. The soul's been speaking all along. Maybe it's time we finally got quiet enough to hear it. Pain doesn't always walk in the front door. Sometimes it creeps in through the cracks you didn't know were there. You wake up tired. You're irritable for no reason. You start snapping at people you love. The little things feel heavier than they should. And you tell yourself, I'm just stressed, or it's just a rough week. But then that rough week turns into a rough month, and suddenly you're carrying something you can't name, and you don't know how long it's been weighing you down. That's not random. That's not weakness. That's your soul waving the red flag because it's been silenced too long. See, we often treat pain like it's the enemy. Like if we just keep pushing, we can outrun it. So we fill our schedules, pile on responsibilities, drown out the discomfort with noise. But pain is never pointless. It shows up when something deeper has been ignored. That tightness in your chest, that tension in your neck, that heaviness you feel at the end of the day, even when you've done everything right. That's the soul speaking through the body. Because when you stop listening internally, your body starts screaming externally. We've normalized burnout. We've normalized anxiety. We walk around like ticking time bombs, functioning but not really living. And underneath it all, there's this quiet voice trying to get through, trying to say, this isn't working. But we've gotten so good at numbing, so good at pretending, we don't hear it until the breakdown comes. Until the body finally says, enough. And by then, we think we're broken. But we're not. We're just disconnected. Pain is a signal. It's not there to punish you. It's trying to realign you. It's saying, slow down. Look deeper. There's something here that needs attention. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's easier to stay busy than to sit in it. But when you stop long enough to listen, to truly listen, that pain starts pointing you back to the places where healing is possible. That's why silence matters. Because in silence, there's no more running. There's no more hiding. There's just you, raw, honest. And what you find there might be messy. It might be painful. But it's also necessary. Because until you face it, you can't free yourself from it. We think avoiding the pain keeps us safe, but all it really does is keep us stuck. The soul doesn't demand perfection. It asks for presence. It asks you to show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet aren't the ones who pushed through the pain without blinking. They're the ones who stopped, who got still, who listened to what the pain was trying to teach them. And they came out the other side softer, wiser, more whole. Not because the pain didn't touch them, but because they let it shape them instead of define them. You don't have to keep pretending you're okay. You don't have to keep carrying pain that doesn't belong to you anymore. But to let go, you've got to first get quiet. You've got to listen. And when you do, you'll realize that the pain wasn't trying to break you. It was trying to bring you home. There's a moment that hits you when you're alone, not the kind of alone where you're scrolling in bed or halfway answering texts while watching a show. I mean real alone. No noise, no distractions, just you and yourself. And for a lot of people, that moment feels heavy because we've been taught to believe that solitude means isolation, that being alone somehow equals being lonely. But those two things aren't the same, not even close. See, the world around you is constantly pulling at your attention. Everyone wants a piece of you, your energy, your focus, your opinion, your presence. And we give it because we think that's what keeps us connected. But somewhere in the giving, we start losing touch with ourselves. We become versions of who people need us to be instead of who we actually are. That's why solitude is powerful. It's not a punishment. It's a reset. It's not the absence of connection. It's the return to true connection with yourself. Being alone isn't the problem. Being disconnected from who you are, that's where the trouble starts. Solitude gives you a space to strip away the noise, to stop performing, to stop explaining, to stop proving. And when you stop all that, you begin to hear the truth of who you are underneath the expectations, underneath the pressure. That space isn't empty. It's sacred. But most people don't sit with themselves long enough to find that out. The silence feels awkward. The stillness feels foreign. And so they run. They fill their calendar. They surround themselves with voices, even if those voices don't serve them. They chase noise, thinking it'll fix the void. But the truth is, the answers they're looking for aren't out there. They're within. Always have been. They're just buried under the noise. When you step into solitude, something shifts. You start noticing how much energy you've been spending trying to meet expectations that were never yours. You realize how loud the world has been and how long you've ignored the whisper of your own needs. You begin to recognize the difference between what's real and what's just routine. And that awareness, that's everything. It takes courage to be alone and not reach for distraction. It takes strength to be with your thoughts and not run from them. But that's where the growth is. That's where the alignment starts. That's where the healing finds you. You can't grow in chaos. You grow in stillness. You evolve in reflection. You become in the quiet. Some of the most powerful shifts in life don't happen in a crowd. They happen in the quiet hours, in the solitude, when the world goes silent and your soul steps forward. That's where decisions are made. That's where old pain gets processed. That's where clarity walks in without asking for permission. So don't confuse being alone with being empty. Don't mistake solitude for a void. Because the more you sit with yourself, the more you realize you're not empty at all. You're layered. You're deep. You're full of wisdom and truth and power that can't be accessed through constant noise. It only reveals itself when you choose stillness. And when you finally learn how to be with yourself, truly be with yourself, everything else in life starts to feel a little less demanding, a little less loud, because you're no longer lost in the noise. You've come home. You ever notice how the biggest moments of clarity don't usually happen in the middle of chaos? They come in the pauses, that quiet ride home, that slow walk at dusk, that early morning before the world wakes up. Those aren't just peaceful moments, they're powerful ones. Because growth doesn't show up shouting, It waits for the noise to settle. It needs space. It needs stillness. And that's why we miss it so often. We're too distracted to even recognize it when it comes. We think growth has to be loud, dramatic, public. We think it happens on big stages, during breakthroughs, after some grand event. But most of the time, it happens quietly, privately, in silence, when no one's watching, in the background of your life, where the world isn't clapping and the spotlight's turned off. That's where the real stuff takes place. The inner rewiring, the unlearning, the strengthening, the understanding, and none of that happens when you're drowning in distraction. The truth is, the noise feels comfortable because it's predictable. You always have something to do, somewhere to be, someone to answer to, and it gives you this illusion of progress. Like you're moving forward because you're moving at all. But motion isn't the same as direction. You can be busy and still be lost. You can be loud and still be unheard by yourself. That's why silence matters. It gives you a chance to stop spinning and actually see where you are. To ask the harder questions, am I aligned with who I want to be? Am I living a life that makes sense to my soul, not just to my schedule? You don't need another achievement to grow. You need space to reflect, time to check in, quiet to hear what's trying to surface. That's why so many people stay stuck. They never stop long enough to listen. And if you can't hear yourself, you can't heal yourself, you can't guide yourself, you can't grow past what you won't face. And sometimes, the only way to face it is in stillness. It's in that quiet that patterns reveal themselves. You begin to notice what drains you and what fuels you. You realize the thoughts you've been believing that were never true. You start seeing the small ways you've been betraying yourself just to keep the peace or keep moving. That kind of awareness doesn't shout, it whispers, it unfolds. And that process, that's growth. That's real evolution. Stillness forces honesty, and honesty is the foundation of transformation. You can't fake it with yourself when there's no noise to hide behind. You can't deflect or delay. It's just you stripped of the distractions looking yourself in the eye, and it's in that raw space that change takes root. Not overnight, not in dramatic fashion, but slowly, quietly. Like roots growing beneath the surface before anything ever blooms. You don't have to wait for your world to fall apart to find clarity. You can choose it. You can create it. You can build silence into your life and protect it like it's sacred. Because it is. It's where your mind breathes. It's where your soul recovers. It's where your next chapter quietly begins to write itself. So if you've been searching for growth, don't look for it in the noise. Don't expect it to show up loud and obvious. Listen for it in the still moments, the quiet spaces. That's where it's been waiting for you all along. Presence is one of those things people talk about, but very few actually live. Because being present isn't just about standing in a room or sitting in a chair. It's about showing up fully. Mind, body, spirit. But the truth is, most people aren't really here. They're somewhere else. Caught in a loop of what just happened or what might happen next. Worrying, planning, replaying, performing. Physically present, mentally miles away. And it shows in how they speak, how they move, how they connect. That distance. It's not because they're careless. It's because they're disconnected from themselves. And it's hard to be present when you're never still. When you've got 100 tabs open in your mind and your body's moving on autopilot. That's where silence steps in, because silence doesn't just slow you down, it brings you back. It anchors you. It forces you to land in your own body again, to listen to your own breath, to become aware of where you really are, not just geographically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Presence is a return. It's a grounding. It's a moment where you stop drifting and decide, I'm going to live this moment, not just pass through it. That level of presence is power. Because when you're fully here, you speak differently. You hear people with more intention. You choose your words with more care. You walk through rooms not with arrogance, but with certainty. You're not reacting, you're responding. You're not scattered, you're steady. The world feels chaotic, but you don't. That's what presence does. It centers you in a world that's constantly pulling you in every direction. But you can't be present if you're full of noise. You can't connect with the now if your mind is buried in distractions, guilt, or fear. And that's where the soul starts to feel suffocated. Not because it's weak, but because it's overwhelmed. It's buried under layers of things you've been carrying that don't belong in this moment. That's why silence is necessary. It clears the clutter. It gives your mind room to breathe. It gives your heart space to catch up. It allows your soul to stretch out again. And when that happens, everything changes. You start showing up to your own life. You start seeing people again. Hearing your own laughter again. Tasting your food instead of just eating it. Feeling the ground beneath your feet instead of rushing to what's next. That's not small. That's everything. Because so much of life is missed not because we're absent, but because we're distracted. You blink and a week is gone. A year. A season. And you wonder why things feel empty, why you feel disconnected. It's because your body's been here, but you haven't. Presence doesn't require perfection. It doesn't mean you'll never be distracted again, but it means you're aware. It means you come back again and again. You notice when your mind drifts and gently return to the moment like it matters. Because it does. Every breath, every step, every interaction, every quiet pause, that's your life. And when you live it fully, when you choose to be here, not in your past, not in your plans, but here, you find a different kind of peace, a deeper kind of strength, a truth that can't be touched by the chaos outside. And the beautiful part, that kind of presence, it doesn't come from achieving more or doing more. It comes when the noise fades, the body rests, and the soul finally has space to speak. That's when you stop just existing and start living.